And it kind of comes back to these huge man-made structures that probably the general public would find quite ugly. And it just kind of enhances these little pockets of space that these man-made structures create.
As part of LFA 2022, we unveiled 5 new benches in the Royal Docks as part of the Pews and Perches design competition with the Royal Docks team. Now in its 3rd edition, this series of 5 benches aims to improve London public realm, celebrate emerging architectural talent, and connect people with the buildings and spaces around them. We caught up with each of the winning designers to find out the story behind the benches. Here, Fiona tells us about her bench, GAM.
Hi, I'm Fiona Hartley and I designed the GAM bench with James Parkes. So when we visited the Royal Docks, we were kind of super inspired by, strangely, the DLR, and we just thought that spatially it was really interesting. We were really inspired by these huge man-made infrastructures in the area and how they kind of told the history of the area, such as the DLR arriving and kind of reviving it and allowing all of these people that lived around there to then connect with other spaces around there much more easily. And you can kind of see the regeneration in the area through all of these different things, such as the DLR and the cable cars and like the XL Centre. And I just think around there, it's like super spatially interesting. You have like this huge body of water of the Royal Docks and then like these bridges overarching, creating all these little pockets of space. And there's just not really anywhere else like it in London. So we wanted the bench to kind of be a sort of monument in ways to the TLR and the regeneration of the area. So we quite literally took one supporting element from a DLR bridge and scaled this down slightly. And then we played around with different configurations of how this could become a bench. And then we arrived at this kind of modular idea, which was alternating this piece of the bridge turned upside down on its side. Our material was actually kind of the starting point for the project. We were interested in the industries in the area, and obviously you have the old flour mill, but we kind of looked at what waste the whole area produced now. And we quite early on were investigating, using material or paper or something as kind of an aggregate in a molded product. So we arrived at the idea that we would use paper waste. And then we kind of looked further into stuff like papercrete, paper and resin, and all of these different kinds of ways that you can use paper as building material. And then we loved that using paper as an aggregate in cement, you kind of almost replicate this effect of, the weathered stone of the Royal Docks that's been like water damaged over time. And then to further push that, we saw an old image of the Royal Docks before it was actually filled with water. And you could kind of see in the materiality of how deep it was, there was all of these gradient-like colours. So we kind of wanted to replicate that. And we looked at Rachel White-Reed and other artists who have this kind of graphic materiality to their work. And we wanted to replicate that. And then it also comes back to like sedimentary rock and that kind of material. It's quite natural, but, in contrast, it has this man-made waste in it with all the paper formed in layers. The bench being positioned on Connaught Crossing, it's interesting because it kind of adds to the narrative that we were inspired by when we first visited the Royal Dock. And it kind of comes back to this idea of these huge man-made structures that probably the general public would find quite ugly. like the huge bridges, the DLR, and it just kind of enhances these little pockets of space that these man-made structures create in this beautiful area. I think it would be really interesting for people to see it, and maybe at first glance it kind of camouflages in with the area. It doesn't look like a super new object, or maybe it looks like something that has been there a while. And I think that's quite an interesting provocation for people who are maybe new to the area or even are frequently in the area. They're like, oh, has that always been there? Kind of like a hiding in plain sight type of thing.
Thanks for listening to this conversation. If you've enjoyed the conversation and would like to listen to more like this, search for Building Sounds on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favourite podcast.